you have in this hearing here. It's very important to us, and you know, it's been really difficult since this rule came out on labor to figure out what the right pathway is for us to take. I'm reminded of an event this summer. I went to a funeral of one of our colleagues, Frank Philp, and he was a sheep and cattle man from central Wyoming, one of these greatest guys you ever want to meet. And the priest said, he said, most of the leaders in the Old Testament were shepherds, and that's because they spent their lives in the great cathedral of the Lord. That's what these people are. And when you understand the incredible diversity of spider web of federal rules and regulations that are coming down on us, it is just difficult. And I've always felt, you know, as an individual, as our family, as our community, our valley has a great reputation for doing conservation. If we did the right things, we would be somewhat invulnerable to the regulations. When in the middle of April we had these rules come from the Department of Labor, it was a lightning bolt. And when you began to read them, you thought, well, they don't know us, and they did these regulations because they don't know what we do. I'm completely changed my mind on that. They know exactly what we do. And so you have a wage issue that is going to have to be resolved because it's undoable. And the University of Wyoming did a study on the economics. 8% of the time under these rules would anybody ever be able to make money, and that's not taking into consideration debt service, which all of us have. I mean, this is a knockout blow. And when you look at the federal regulations or their regulations from the Department of Labor on grazing and definitions of grazing, it's a checkmate. We trail our sheep 150 miles one way and back through from 25 acre to 200,000 acre pastures, and the attempt for the Department of Labor to making definitions about that is ridiculous. It's not doable, and the more you know, the more you realize this was not designed to be you know, sort of a back and forth with an industry and how you do a better job. This was designed to take our industry out. And be sure to know this isn't just about the sheep industry. This is the cattle and sheep industry. My neighbor, Matt Weber, is a cattleman. We have permits and land next to each other. We have more sage grouse and mule deer than anybody in the country, and we're proud of that. But when we look at these rules, and he can't have his men and I can't have my men, we can't make our payments. It's that simple in 1 year. And so, you know, there's a process. I'll be in D.C. with Sean this next week talking to USDA and Interior because they are going to get to weigh in this week. But we need you to weigh in for us because this is a rule that was developed, and that's the most frustrating part is it's a rule. And so the legislative process is totally eliminated, and I don't have to tell you guys what that means. You know, I have testified before your committee on water issues. The Waters of the United States rule is one that is, again, coming through by rule. You know, I would just comment to you in this context that we're all people that look into the future. You know, there's grandkids, great-grandkids here. We know that storage is a critical part of our future, and yet the way that the rules are written, it will be much more difficult to do storage or planning in the long term. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why, but as far as I'm concerned, that's the most important reason to look at, you know, how that rule was put in without any understanding of what the West means, and particularly in a year like this when early runoffs and not having local storage, it's going to be a catastrophe for us. There's so much that I can mention. I know that I've got more notes than I've got time, but one of the things that we in the sheep business did, and our family does both, we could see our industry in trouble, and so with Representative Lummis and Senator Enzi, we spent 4 years in our industry creating the Mountain States Lamb Co-op. 170 producers in 10 states that bought a company in New York, and now we have a vertical integrated company that we can see some opportunity in the future if we could just keep our men. That company has 150 union employees in New York, 140 in Greeley, Colorado. 68% of those lambs are our supply. Our wool this year goes to the military. By law, the wool for the military uniforms has to come from American wool. That's by law. Where's that going to come from now? China? I mean, we are, people are proud of producing food, and I've spent 3 years on a food policy national initiative. How do you feed 9.7 billion people? And it's by producing food. That's what we do. We're proud of what we do. And yet, we're taking whole categories of the food supply out, whether it be through the irrigation experiences we're having in California with the combination of drought, but more the use of that irrigation water for other uses. And so when you put the complex, as I said earlier, the complex spider web of regulatory stuff, Mrs. Budd told you the way it is. And when you try to figure it out, and I have try to have a personal reputation as being a partner. And we have done a lot of work with Fish and Wildlife Service and with Department of Interior and USDA, but their own missions are now contradicted by these rules. And I think that there's a realization starting to happen with them that the rules that are being promulgated take away the grazing capability of USDA and Interior. So it's a very complicated and mixed web. The one thing that I would tell you, and Sharon mentioned this to me, and I wrote it down as my final comment, and I don't know if you understand just what kind of a raid mentality is going on with the Department of Labor, of ranchers all over the West who are show up with a team to interrogate and intimidate. That has to end. That is not right. That is not the way that we've done America. And so instead of the Department of Labor being able to help us find enough labor, we're all people that are trying to have legal labor. 80% of the labor in California is illegal, and billions of dollars of produce are sitting on the ground because they can't get enough labor. We've tried through this process to have legal people, and yet now we're running up into a checkmate that I'm sure you guys are all aware of. And anything that we can do to help, we're there for you, and we appreciate so much you being here for us.
Thank you, Pat. I now recognize Mr. Sims for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lummis and Chairman Bishop. I'd like to thank the subcommittee for scheduling this hearing here in Evanston, Wyoming. This is my hometown. I, along with my father and brother, run our ranch. We run a sheep and cattle ranch herd that we travel from the high Uinta Mountains here in Representative Bishop's district to Kimmer, Rock Springs, Fontanelle area. The things I would like to talk about are the Department of Labor's H2A new proposed rule, bighorn and domestic sheep, that those two issues alone could put our ranch and have severe detrimental impacts to our sheep industry. I'll start with the Department of Labor. The wage increase that they have proposed in this new rule is, granted they have given a 5-year phase-in period, but this will make most ranches not economically viable. The study that Mr. O'Toole referenced from the University of Wyoming, without taking in any cost associated with your land and your fixed cost, takes it to 30% of the years you will be able to show a profit, just on operating expenses. You cannot go to a bank and get a loan. You cannot have a future at 30%. And then you add in the land costs and the opportunity costs for that, it takes it to 8% of the time. Absolutely no way, based on today's prices and the prices that have been received, do we stand a chance of making a profit or being able to get financing. And this is all tied with the market price. Now there's some speculation that the prices will go up, but this market price is tied to international trade, it's tied to currency values, and there is no way that will change to accommodate the change in the wage rate. Without the ability to have these men on these range herds, and a lot of my neighbors I see in the crowd today and friends and other industry are faced with the same issue. If we do not have these herders and do not have this labor, we have to sell the sheep right now. There is no backup plan. There is no labor here in the United States that we have been able to find that will herd these sheep and stay. And you have to be qualified. There's a huge qualification comes with these men and workers. The other issue that has come to light out of the rule is the fencing issue. They're saying that open range is unfenced areas. I can tell you that is not the truth that's on the ground. Through even on these large ranges, they generally have perimeter fences. They have cross fences. On our large Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service ranges, we are required by our permits to fix those fences. Now, how can we have herders, and the Department of Labor say that we can't run under fences when their sister agencies, the U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management, require us to fix fences that are on our allotments and across the and pasture fences. The herders are needed to protect the sheep from dangers such as predators and inclement weather in the winter, and also to rotate these pastures to properly graze them. And in the wintertime, of course, we're on a lot of desert areas that have huge expanses with no fencing, and the sheep live off of snow, so you have to be able to find those snow banks or those areas and take those sheep to the feed. So with that and the fencing should be part of the herding rule. It is a tool that is used along with the actual herders and other things that we do. One other thing that is not taken into account is all the other expenses besides the actual labor wage rate, keeping the paperwork, room and board, the mobile housing that we have to have, because most of these sheep are herded in extremely remote areas. So it's a lot greater expense than just the wage rate that we're up against. I'd like to move on to the bighorn domestic sheep issue. The pay-it decision out of Idaho was reached based on species viability of the bighorn sheep. The decision was made because of possible transference of pneumonia diseases from domestic sheep to bighorn sheep to remove approximately 70% of the domestic sheep on the Payette National Forest. This decision has been made, and Region 4 has moved on to the entire region. That affects myself and my neighbors in Wyoming and both in Utah and in all of Region 4, based on the fact that the Forest Service has gone ahead with this risk assessment analysis, and they have released that, which quite honestly shows allotments being canceled and closed and others being reduced. Now, granted, this is not a decision, but the decision will be made from that risk assessment analysis. We've asked repeatedly for alternative allotments to be able to look at that. Our 4 governors out of Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, and Nevada have asked for this list of alternative allotments. We have been promised it, but we have not seen it. Also, on our particular area here, which is in the Uinta Mountains, we had a herd that was reintroduced in 1988. Mr. Joe Broadbent asked the Forest Service what reassurances as far as sheep producers do we have that these won't affect us. He did receive a letter dated April 5th of 1998 that the introduction of the bighorns would have no effect on his permits nor permits in the surrounding area, as 3 domestic sheep permits were returned to the forester. I guess the proper terminology would be they were not restocked so that the bighorn sheep could be put in there. So here we are 27 years later, fighting for our economic viability with a herd that we had promises from the Forest Service would not affect our sheep grazing permits. Other issues with the bighorn sheep grazing is that the science is not absolute. There are die-offs with no known contact with domestic sheep. Disease is endemic in some of the herds of domestic sheep. And contact with bighorn sheep to domestic sheep does not actually equate to disease transmission. We looked into this science that the Forest Service used, and they never contacted the Agricultural Research Service on this science that they used. Dr. Knowles is out of the Pullman Institute, is a leading scientist on this disease transmission. There are much more greater factors that come into play with disease. It is a Pasteurella hemolytica, manhemia, and other diseases that do cause these die-offs. However, they didn't consult with their own Agricultural Research Service. And another thing that has been kind of brought to light that we figured all along, but this science was predicated on the basis of we have the end goal, how do we get the science to We have the idea, the end idea. How do we get the science to prove that? And that's what the Forest Service and USDA did. They had the end goal of what they wanted to do. One other thing I'd like to touch about is categorical exclusion lawsuit, which goes along with the bighorn sheep and this Department of Labor. The litigious environmental groups and anti-grazing groups are using the Equal Access Justice Fund and Equal Access to Justice Act to fund these attorneys' fees and these lawsuits. Much of these lawsuits are not brought upon by decisions that affect the resource. They are brought upon by technicalities and issues that would not help the management of the land, or that missing a deadline, not crossing your I's and dotting your T's. So when we have these categorical exclusion settlements where the government settles with these groups, or litigants file, a lot of the lawsuits get settled because they don't want to go to court. We need to back up these agencies and take it to task. The Equal Access to Justice Act was set up with the intent of having the ordinary citizen be able to make decisions, or to challenge federal decisions, not set up for a money-making machine for the environmental groups and the radical anti-grazing groups. And in just finishing, there's a lot of my friends and neighbors and family in the crowd. We are here. We are proud of being agriculture producers. I have been here my entire life, my family for 6 generations. My biggest fear is that this agriculture production will come to an end on my watch. Thank you, Chairman.